Tonight, the January 6th investigation has written to a cable news host to ask him to preserve his communications related to the January 6th attack on the Capitol, including his communications with former President Trump and others at the Trump White House. They are asking him to come in for a transcribed interview, asking him to come in voluntarily for a transcribed interview. They are not subpoenaing him, nor are they raising that prospect. But of course, that kind of a prospect looms in an investigation in which lots of other people have been subpoenaed. In this letter to this cable news host, they have released a series of his texts, his communications with Trump White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows in particular. The reason they have released those texts, it appears, is to make the case both to him and to the public that he is an important fact witness for the investigation and that they need to ask him questions about what he knows because he may know stuff that other people really don't. Now, the TV host in question is a man named Sean Hannity. He's a primetime weeknight host at the Fox News Channel. And regardless of whether or not you have heard of him or seen his show or his commentary about January 6th or about Trump more broadly, it does appear from what the investigation released tonight that Mr. Hannity was kind of in the thick of it, at least with the White House Chief of Staff and apparently with the president himself. They say, quote, "Dear Mr. Hannity, the Select Committee now has information in its possession indicating that you had advanced knowledge regarding President Trump's and his legal team's planning for January 6th. It also appears that you were expressing concerns and providing advice to President Trump and certain White House staff regarding that planning. You also had relevant communications while the riot was underway and in the days thereafter. These communications make you a fact witness in our investigation. The Select Committee is in possession of dozens of text messages you sent to and received from former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others related to the 2020 election and President Trump's efforts to contest the outcome of that vote. For example, on December 31st, 2020, you texted Mark Meadows the following, quote, "We can't lose the entire White House counsel's office. I do not see January 6th happening the way he is being told." He, presumably meaning the president? After the 6th, he should announce he will lead the nationwide effort to reform voting integrity. Go to FL, presumably that's Florida, and watch Joe, presumably Joe Biden, mess up daily. Stay engaged. When he speaks, people will listen. Quote, "This text suggests that you had knowledge of concerns by President Trump's White House counsel's office regarding the legality of the former president's plans for January 6th. These facts are directly relevant to our inquiry. Similarly, on January 5th, the night before the violent riot, you sent and received a stream of texts. You wrote, quote, 'I'm very worried about the next 48 hours.' With the counting of the electoral votes scheduled for the following day, January 6th at 1 p.m., why were you concerned about the next 48 hours? Also, on the evening of January 5th, you texted White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, quote, 'Pence pressure. White House counsel will leave.' What communications or information led you to conclude that White House counsel would leave? What precisely did you know at that time?" The committee continues, quote, "It also appears from other text messages that you may have had a conversation directly with President Trump on the evening of January 5th, and perhaps at other times, regarding his planning for January 6th. We're also aware of and interested in your communications to Mr. Meadows and others during the violent attack on January 6th as the rioters were attempting to occupy the Capitol building. For example, on January 6th, you texted to Mark Meadows press coverage relating to a potential effort by members of Trump's cabinet to remove him from office using the 25th Amendment. As you may recall, Secretary DeVos and Secretary Chao both resigned following President Trump's conduct on January 6th, as did members of the president's White House staff. We would like to question you regarding any conversations you had with Mark Meadows or others about any effort to remove President Trump using the 25th Amendment. Additionally, you appear to have had a discussion with President Trump on January 10th that may have raised a number of specific concerns about his actions in the days before the inauguration, January 20th. You wrote to Mark Meadows and Congressman Jim Jordan on January 10th, quote, "Guys, we have a clear path to land the plane in 9 days. He can't mention the election again, ever. I did not have a good call with him today. And worse, I'm not sure what is left to do or say, and I don't like not knowing if it's truly understood." ideas. Again, that text message sent to White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Trumpy Republican Congressman Jim Jordan. The committee continues, quote, "None of these communications are subject to any kind of privilege. They all bear directly on the issues before our committee. We cannot in good faith fail to question you on these and other specific issues relevant to our investigation, which includes an investigation into the facts and circumstances relating to the interference with the peaceful transfer of power." And this is interesting. Again, the gentleman to whom this letter has been directed is a cable news host. The committee says, quote, "We stress that our goal is not to seek information regarding any of your broadcasts or your political views or your commentary. We have deep respect for the First Amendment to our Constitution. As we detailed above, you appear to have factual information directly relevant to the events of January 6th and the attack on the institutions of our democracy. We have a duty to understand all of the underlying facts and make legislative recommendations. Please identify for the Select Committee the name of your counsel. We will work closely with that person as soon as possible to schedule a time for a transcribed interview with the Select Committee. We're also interested in other communications you may have had with the White House, President Trump, the Trump legal team, or any other persons involved in the events of January 6th. We now ask you to preserve all records of such communications. We have no doubt that you love our country and respect our Constitution. Now is the time to step forward and serve the interests of your country. We thank you in advance for your cooperation." And it is signed Benny Thompson, the chairman, and Liz Cheney, the vice chair of the investigation. What a world we're in. Again, this letter sent tonight to a cable news host at the popular Fox News channel. We don't know how he will respond. We don't know if he'll provide information to the committee or not. The committee had, it should be noted, they had previously released another of his text messages to the White House in which he pleaded for then President Trump to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol on January 6th. So we know from this man's private communications that he believed at the time of the attack on the Capitol that Trump was responsible for and he could control the behavior of the Trump-supporting mob that day. For what it's worth, that sentiment that Trump was responsible, that in fact Trump could have stopped January 6th if he wanted to, that is not something this gentleman has articulated publicly about January 6th, although his private communications at the time suggest that is what he actually knew to be the case. So we will see. His lawyer says that he is reviewing the request from the committee and there's been no substantive response yet. We shall see. In terms of connecting the dots here, though, there had been previous reporting, including from testimony to the Senate, that Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Pat Cipollone, had said at a White House meeting on January 3rd that he would resign as White House counsel. He was reported to have said that at a January 3rd meeting in the Oval Office where Trump was discussing the possibility of installing a new attorney general so he could use the Justice Department to basically force the falsification of the election results. We knew previously from other testimony that Cipollone had threatened to resign at that meeting over that prospect about the Justice Department being used in that way. These new texts from Mr. Hannity released tonight would seem to suggest that the White House counsel, Mr. Cipollone, also threatened to resign even earlier than that, 4 days earlier than that, as earlier as last New Year's Eve. What was that threat to resign about? Also, from the texts from Mr. Hannity that were released by the investigation tonight, it would appear that the White House counsel, Mr. Cipollone, also was renewing those threats to resign on days later, on January 5th, the night before the attack on the Capitol. According to Mr. Hannity's text, that threat to resign would appear to have been a response to the pressure that was being put on Vice President Mike Pence by Trump and his co-conspirators, pressure to try to get Mike Pence to effectively spoil the counting of the Electoral College votes in Congress on January 6th. Did Pat Cipollone threaten to resign on New Year's Eve, on January 3rd, on January 5th? Again, we do not know if Mr. Hannity will respond to this request for him to provide information to this committee to sort of flesh out the facts around those previously unknown details about what happened. It is interesting that they are appealing to his patriotism in asking him to give information to the committee. I don't know. I think regardless of party, regardless of cable news outlet of your choice, all Americans would like to know what Mr. Hannity knew on January 5th that made him text to the White House, "I am very worried about the next 48 hours." What did he know about what was going to happen in the next 48 hours that made him tell the White House Chief of Staff he was very worried?